All right, and I think that Roseanne is our liturgist for this morning.
Yes, I am.
All right, so I'm going to share my screen, and we'll let Roseanne lead us.
Please join me in the call to worship. You pour your spirit out on astonished believers.
God's dwelling place is among the people.
Believers.
You give mercy and grace, inviting us to approach with confidence.
God's dwelling place is among the people.
You transform us, renewing our minds.
God's dwelling place is among the people.
You command us to love one another, to place each other above ourselves. God's dwelling
place is among the people. All right, our opening hymn is 2172. If you happen to have a Faith We Sing with you, it's We Are Called. I'm going to mute everybody except for Matthew so that he can play and sing for us.
I love this song. I love this song.
Okay, I heard someone say, I love this song. Harder than I thought it would be to play and sing at the same time. So just help me out by singing over me, and then we'll be good to go. All right, looks like we're all muted. Here we go. Here we go. Come live in the light, shine with the joy and the love of the Lord. We are called to be light for the kingdom, live in the freedom of the city of God. We are called to act with justice. We are called to love tenderly. We are called to serve one another, to walk humbly with God. Come, open your heart, show your mercy to all those in fear. We are called to be hope for the hopeless, so all hatred and blindness will be no more. We are called to act with justice. We are called to love tenderly. We are called to serve one another, to walk humbly with God. Sing, sing a new song. Sing of the great day when all will be one. God will reign, and we'll walk with each other as sisters and brothers, united in love. We are called to act with justice. We are called to love tenderly. We are called to serve one another, to walk humbly with God.
Today's scripture reading is from 2 John 1, verses 1 through 13, not 1 through 3. The elder to the elect lady and her children, whom I love in the truth, and not only I, but also all who know the truth, because the truth that abides in us and will be with us forever. Grace, mercy, and peace be with us from God the Father and from Jesus Christ, the Father's Son, in truth and love. I was overjoyed to find some of your children walking in the truth, just as we have been commanded by the Father. But now, dear lady, I ask you, not as though I were writing you a new commandment, but one we have heard from the beginning. Let us love one another. And this is love, that we walk according to his commandments. This is the commandment, just as you have heard it from the beginning. You must walk in it. Many deceivers have gone into the world, those who do not confess that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh. Any such person is the deceiver and the Antichrist. Be on your guard, so that you do not lose what we have worked for, but may receive a full reward. Everyone who does not abide in the teaching of Christ, but goes beyond it, does not have God. Whoever abides in his teaching has both the Father and the Son. Do not receive into the house or welcome anyone who comes to you and does not bring this teaching, for to welcome is to participate in the evil deeds of such a person. Although I have much to write to you, I'd rather not use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to come to you and talk to you face to face, so that our joy may be complete. The children of your elect sister send you their greetings. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
All right. Thank you, Roseanne. We are on the home stretch of our journey through the Bible together. We've been, 9.5 months through this 10-month journey. So it is, this is the next to last week. We've gone through the entire Hebrew Bible and almost all the New Testament. We did the Gospels and Acts, Paul's letters, and we did Hebrews last week. And so today we turn to the General Epistles, which are the letters that were written by someone other than Paul, a different apostle or New Testament figure. And so these are the General Epistles: James, 1st and 2nd Peter, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and Jude. And each one is a little bit different. I'm going to focus today on 2nd John. One of the reasons for that is that, so I keep a spreadsheet of all the sermons I've ever preached, and I've never done one on 2nd John. So I figured this would be a good chance to do that. Many of you may have never heard a sermon on 2nd John, so here we go. But each letter deals with a little bit of a different topic. James is probably the most well-known of these letters. And in particular, that passage around faith and good works that says that faith without works is dead. And so this necessity that both of those happen in our lives, and as we are people of faith, that faith and works go hand in hand. They're not separate, but they complement one another. 1st Peter, most scholars agree, actually was written by Peter, and it talks about the need for faithfulness in the midst of persecution and suffering. 2nd Peter has kind of a different style of writing and grammar and stuff than 1st Peter, so most scholars think that Peter didn't actually write it, and it is a little harsher, I guess is maybe a good word. It condemns false teachers. It talks about the second coming of Christ and why it hasn't happened yet, and some other things. Much of the 2nd chapter of 2nd Peter is identical or quotes from the book of Jude. So Jude, again, focuses on false teachers and the importance of avoiding them. But then we turn to these Johannine letters, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. The way that my seminary professor described them is that 1st John is kind of a commentary or an explanation of the Gospel of John. John's Gospel is a bit confusing. Jesus says all these kind of strange things and does this weird stuff and is kind of operating on two different planes, a physical plane and then a spiritual plane. And so 1st John tries to explain what's going on there. And again, the theme that runs through 1st John is the theme of love, that we are called to love, that's the commandment that Jesus gives us. Just as Cindy was talking about in the children's message, our need to love one another even during this time of COVID crisis. And then my seminary professor describes 2nd and 3rd John as kind of cover letters or recommendation letters for 1st John, that they might accompany it as it traveled around the New Testament world to different churches and people. And so that's kind of what we get here with 2nd John. So let's look at it in particular. So a little bit of background information on 2nd John. Again, scholars aren't positive, but it is at least thought traditionally that it was written by the Apostle John. He is the only apostle, at least according to tradition, to live into old age and to die of natural causes. All the other disciples were arrested and persecuted and killed, many crucified and other methods as well. But it's thought that John the Apostle lived into old age and carried on his ministry into that time. And so at the beginning of the letter, where it says it's from the elder, it would make sense that John would be called that, living into his old age. It's also a feature of these letters and books attributed to John that he is not named specifically. So in the Gospel of John, he's called the beloved disciple, and his name is never mentioned in 1st, 2nd, or 3rd John. So some people say, scholars say that, if John actually wrote it, then it would be weird to, name himself, so he uses those. Another thought is that perhaps they were written by people who knew him or were part of the community that he led, and so it was kind of a way to honor him by not naming him, but calling him the elder or calling him the beloved disciple. So that's a little bit of background. So when we get into the salutation, again, this is a short letter. It's the, in terms of number of verses, it's the shortest book in the Bible at just 13 verses. So it starts off with the salutation, just kind of a greeting of who's writing and to whom and all that kind of stuff. And it says that it's written to a lady. Now, the Greek word is kyria, which is like Kyrie, which means Lord, so Lord and lady. And it's unclear whether this lady is referring to a person or to a church. Churches are often kind of referred to in the feminine sense, just like ships and other things. And so one thought is that it's talking about a church, and the children of the lady are the members of that church. But it could be talking about a specific person. Some have even posited that Kyria was the name of a person, which is possible. But it may just be another person, another lady in general. Some scholars have thought that it was referring to Mary, the mother of Jesus. And this makes a little bit of sense because if you remember at the crucifixion, John appears at the foot of the cross, and Jesus tells John basically to take care of his mother. And so it might make sense that this letter was from John to Mary, Jesus's mother. But either way, the salutation ends with a blessing. It says, grace, mercy, and peace be upon the people in truth and in love. Then it goes into two different paragraphs, one paragraph on love and one paragraph on truth. The paragraph on love really hits at the heart of the Johannine theology and what's important. Again, that letter of 1 John really focuses on what it means to love one another. And the point here is that love has always been the main thing when it comes to Jesus's message and ministry. On Fridays, we have been having a Netflix party where some of us gather online and we watch a Netflix movie together and can chat and stuff back and forth. And this week, our movie was The Big Miracle, which was about some whales. It's based on a true story. Some whales up in Alaska that got trapped by some ice and weren't able to get out to open water. And people kind of mobilized and did what they could to try to save these whales. And one of the main characters was played by Drew Barrymore, and she was a volunteer with Greenpeace. And she kind of lives into the stereotype of a Greenpeace person. But often when we kind of think of somebody in Greenpeace or somebody who's dedicated to a particular cause, they have this same message that comes up over and over and over again. Whenever they talk, it's just this one thing that comes out. And for her, of course, it's about the environment and caring for animals. But that's really what it's like in John's books. There's this one theme that comes through and that's hammered through every time, and that is the theme of love, that we are called to love one another, that is the message that Jesus gives to us, the commandment, and it is what Jesus embodies in his life and ministry. The second paragraph there is on truth, and it says that there are deceivers or false teachers out in the world, and that we need to watch out for them. And this is a common theme in several of the New Testament books, so it really must have been an issue in those days. Perhaps it is these days as well, I'm not sure. But it emphasizes the need to avoid these folks and to stay in the truth. In particular, there's one lie that is lifted up that seems particularly important, and that is the lie that Jesus has not come in the flesh. So apparently there were some folks in this day, whenever the letter was written, that were saying that Jesus didn't really come in the flesh, that either it was some kind of like a mirage or just a spiritual thing or some other kind of thing. And there were in particular two, what we now refer to as heresies at the time, that taught this. One, and this is all good seminary stuff that I haven't used in 15, 20 years, so here we go. So one of those was called Docetism, and it was this idea that Christ was not human, that Christ was God, but not human, and just merely kind of appeared to be human, kind of almost like a disguise that he was wearing. And so this, of course, was condemned as heretical. One of the things that I've always been interested in is those gospels and letters that didn't make it into the Bible, many of which were written, centuries afterwards, but that claim to be about Jesus. And one of those is the gospel according to Peter. And that really is informed by this idea of Docetism. And in it, Jesus is crucified, and when he's raised from the dead, he comes out of the tomb, and there's two angels or people with him, and their heads go up into heaven. And there is a cross that is floating along behind them, and the cross speaks. So it's really kind of weird stuff, right? But it's kind of grounded in this idea that what we saw of Jesus was just kind of an illusion, but that there was something else, something deeper about him. But John here is saying, no, that's not the case, that Jesus actually was truly here and in the flesh. The second heresy that's kind of related, but a little bit different, is Gnosticism, which I think is a little bit more well-known than Docetism. And the idea in Gnosticism was that Christ was a divine being who came in human form to lead us to the light of true knowledge. So Gnosticism, the word gnosis means knowledge, and so that's what's important there. But again, this was condemned as a heresy in the early church, and so we are left with this message from 2 John that Jesus truly did come in the flesh. So 2 John clearly condemns these false teachings and asserts that Jesus Christ was indeed here in the flesh. And then the ending of the letter closes with this wish to see one another face to face. And boy, we can relate to that, can't we? Especially this morning as we struggled on Zoom and couldn't get on and see people and stuff. It was, I just kind of had this sense of frustration and panic in me, like, this is part of what gets me through the week, is seeing one another's faces. And so to think about not having that as an option was really disconcerting. And so I'm glad for those of us who were able to stick through and see each other, we're able to do that. So I think we can certainly relate to his longing to be able to see someone face to face and be with them. And then closes, the very ending is about the children of your elect sisters and their greetings. And again, it's unclear whether this is a person or a church, but there we go. All right, so there are two themes that I want to lift up, two issues perhaps that are raised that I want us to spend just a few moments on. The first is about truth and love. Truth and love. So with everything else that's been going on in the world, the focus in the United Methodist Church has kind of shifted away from what was at the forefront of most people's minds for the last months and years. And that's around the issue of LGBTQ inclusion and what the church will do about that. If you recall, General Conference, I think, should have been going on right now, but they, of course, postponed that for a year, trying to make decisions about the future of inclusion in the church. And right now, the big debate has kind of shifted, and most of us probably aren't aware, but there's a big controversy about doing online communion, virtual communion. We have been practicing that as a church since we were given permission by the bishop, but there are other annual conferences where the bishop has not given them permission, and there really is kind of a robust theological debate going on within the church about Holy Communion and what it is and how it works, and whether you can do it online or you need to be together in person or what. It's really kind of fascinating. But many of these debates, both of the ones that I mentioned, I think, can be framed as issues of conflict between two values, the value of truth and the value of love. So if we think about LGBTQ inclusion, the value of love, for those who are on the side of inclusion, shows that we want to love and welcome everybody, and that there's a justice issue that's going on here. For those on the other side, there's an issue about truth and looking at the scriptures and trying to stay true to what it is they teach and what they say and the letter of the law and those kinds of things. When we think about communion, on the side of love, we have this desire to extend that table to everyone and to stay connected in community, even though we are far apart in these circumstances. But then those who value truth perhaps are looking at the sacredness and the doctrine that's been taught over the years about communion and what all that means. And so we could go in circles over and over, back and forth around these issues and around these things, and that's not what I'm trying to do this morning. But what I'm trying to have us think about is that often we think of these two things, truth and love, as if they're not compatible with each other, as if they conflict with each other. That you can choose one but not the other. So you can choose to be loving, or you can choose to seek truth, but that they don't fit together. But I think what 2 John shows us here is that they do in fact fit together, that they can be held in tension with each other, and that they can coexist in the same space. In fact, truth and love belong together. And I hope that that's part of the legacy that I'll leave with you at Blakemore, is kind of being able to step outside of those binary ways of thinking, and to hold in tension these things that others might try to put as opposites or as incompatible, both in these kinds of issues and in all different kinds of things. All right, so then second is doubts and questions. 2 John raises the issue of Jesus Christ actually coming in the flesh. And so I think a related issue to that is the issue of bodily resurrection of Jesus. I think it's implied by that first issue. And this issue of the resurrection came up a few weeks ago when we were still doing more of a Bible discussion rather than a sermon. And it has stuck with me because it came up in our discussion, and it was kind of right at the end, and we didn't really have time to talk about it or think about it and wrestle with it together as a group. Now, the church teaches that Jesus Christ was really human and that Jesus Christ was really divine. Both of those things fully and at the same time. The church teaches that Jesus really did die and that Jesus really did come back to life. And even that he is really present with us when we share in Holy Communion through some mysterious way. And we see here that people, even from the beginning, were having trouble believing all of this. They were having trouble believing and accepting and understanding and embracing those teachings of the church from the very early days of the church. And I think sometimes we have this impulse to draw a line in the sand and to kick people out who disagree with us. And maybe sometimes that is necessary, but that's not the impulse that I have, and it's not an impulse that I've experienced at Blakemore. I've experienced our impulse to be one that welcomes these kinds of doubts and questions and invites us to struggle and to wrestle and to ponder together. And on some level, to me, that's exactly what it means to be the church. To bring all these doubts and questions and issues and wrestle with them together as we seek to be faithful people. And so we're going to break into our groups here in just a moment. And I'm going to invite you to take a risk and to be vulnerable with each other, because I think that's what we're called to do as a church. And to share about some of those doubts and questions and struggles that you might have. What is something about the Christian faith that you struggle to believe or that you don't quite understand that is part of our faith tradition? And as we wrestle with those and share those and struggle with those, I would allow us to keep in mind the theme of all the works of John in the Bible, that theme of love. And let love guide us as we share and as we struggle. Let it be our true north. And may we trust that God honors the struggle that we go through, that God is with us, and that God will give us grace, mercy, and peace. I'm going to divide us into our groups now. You should receive an invitation. And would invite you to accept that and join your group. We'll spend about 7 or 8 minutes and come back together. See you in a few.